In this video, I am going to do page 127 in Krugman and Wells Microeconomics 6A, and I'm going to do producer surplus. So like I did for consumer surplus, I am going to start with the graphical representation of the information in our table and calculate producer surplus that way. Because then I think it'll be more intuitive to understand what we're doing algebraically. So first, let me take note of the fact that the problem asks us to consider the surplus at the equilibrium in this market. Now, we know that equilibrium is the place where our quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. So if I just focus on the two columns in this table, I see that that spot where demand equals supply is at the price of $85 per book. That's the quantity demanded is 10, as is the quantity supplied. So now I no longer need quantity demanded for any more of my calculations. So let's see if I can just... Okay, so I just took it away just to avoid confusion. And now I'm just going to start plotting the information in the first quadrant that I've set up here with price on the y-axis and quantity on the horizontal axis, as is usual. Okay, so at $55 per book, I have no suppliers willing to sell at that price. So I'm just going to represent that with a point at the 0.55. So actually, let me go back and put that on 55. And notice that I've truncated the axis, the vertical axis, just to make this drawing a bit easier to do. So, and then I have, at the price of $60 per book, I have one seller who is willing to come into the market and is willing to sell a book at that price. At $65 per book, I have three sellers who are willing to come into the market and buy and sell their book. And I'm actually just going to put in rectangles to correspond with our method thus far of calculating consumer and producer surplus using this rectangle method. So there's my first rectangle. Let's see here. Let's see if I can. So at 65, I have three who are now willing to come into the market. At $70 per book, I have still three sellers willing to come into the market and sell. So I actually haven't added to my number of sellers who are willing to sell. So I'm actually not going to plot 73, because remember here I'm looking at how many more sellers I have coming to the market, and if my number is staying the same at 3, if at $65 per book I have 3 sellers who are willing to sell, and then at $70 per book I still have only 3 sellers willing to sell, that means I have not actually added any sellers to the market by increasing the price of the book to $70 per book. So now let's move on to 75. At the price of $75 per book, I have six sellers coming to the market. So let me set, and that's at 75. I have 6. Okay, and then at $80 per book, I have 9. Okay, and I just put in the rest of those rectangles. I put a dot on the top right-hand corner of each rectangle to signify that that is actually the point that corresponds to the point on the table. So for instance, we have at at the price of $95 per book, we have 22 sellers in the market, and so that corresponds to the point 22, 95, and that is the dot right here. Okay, now if I wanted to think, this is a strange kind of a supply curve, so I'm not going to make the same sort of point I did in the last video about thinking about the demand curve in relation to this, because this is actually a positive decreasing supply curve, which I actually haven't seen. Nevertheless, it's possible, I mean, obviously, because this is the information we're given, but it's a strange kind of supply curve that I'm not going to try and connect to this particular example. We'll have many more better examples to connect it to. So now I'm going to consider the market price at $85. So I'm just going to show that with a horizontal line at 85 coming across like so. Okay, and at $85 now, remember what we have as producer surplus. The producer surplus is going to be the difference between what was actually paid and then the lowest the seller was willing to sell that product for. So it's actually going to be the gap between the top of the bars and the line that represents the market price. So it's those shaded areas there. And so now the problem becomes about calculating the area of each of those shaded portions. And so for the first one, I have the width of this triangle. Remember, this over here is 1. So I have that the width is 1, and it looks like this is 20. The height of this shaded rectangle is 25, and so the area is going to be 25. The second one has a width of, it looks like 2, and a height of 20, so our area is going to be 40. The third shaded area there has a width of 3, and it looks like a height of 10, so our area is going to be 30. And then the last one has a width of 3 and a height of 5, and so our area is going to be 15. So now to get the total producer surplus, I just have to add those areas together. So I have 25 plus 40 plus 30 plus 15, which gives me 110 as the total producer surplus. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to use the graph to do this algebraically. And so you see that I have set up our information to start doing that calculation. I took out quantity of books supplied, quantity of books demanded, because we don't need that anymore. We don't need that in this section. And I have, I just want to call your attention and remind you that $85 is the equilibrium price. So $85 is the actual price that's going to be paid, and we're going to deal with that in a second. Before we do that, let us consider the way we were given quantity of books supplied. Remember that I need to consider not the total amount of sellers, but how many more come to the market as a result of the increase in price of the book. Remember, that is essentially, if we were to think about this graphically, that is that, how many more is the width of our rectangles over in the picture. So, when the price of the book is $55, we have no sellers who are willing to sell at that price. When the price is $60 now, we have one seller that comes in to sell at that price. When the price of the book is $65, we now have 2 more sellers who come in to sell a book at that price. When the price of the book is $70, we have no more sellers come in whose willingness to sell their book is at least $70. And where am I getting these numbers from? I'm just subtracting. So this was 3, and then I subtracted from 3 before it. now when the price moves up to $75, notice we have 3 more sellers come in to sell at that price. Their willingness to sell is at least $75. At $80, we have 3 more, and so on. Okay, so I've just gone ahead and filled in all that information. Now, so again, these numbers here are the width of all of these triangles. I'm sorry, all of these rectangles. That's what we need in order to be able to calculate the consumer surplus. Not the total, but the width. Or in other words, how many sellers has the market generated a certain amount of producer surplus for at different selling prices of the books. So now with this new column that I've created, I'm going to just list the actual price sold. And the actual price is the equilibrium price of $85. And that's all the way down. And now I've created a new column where I'm going to calculate the producer surplus. Just as a reminder, please remember that the producer surplus is going to be the actual price minus what we've called the cost, which is actually the lowest price at which the seller is willing to sell. Okay, so here let's consider the first entry. I have that the actual price of the book is $85. And for this first entry, we have the price of the book at $55, but we have no sellers who were willing to sell at that price. So we actually have 0 producer surplus created at the price of $55. What does that correspond to? Well, that corresponds, if we go over to the graph, it corresponds to this point right on the y-axis there at 0.55. No sellers at the price of 55. Okay, moving down the line, we do actually have one seller who has entered the market willing to sell their book at $60. And they were pleasantly surprised when they were able to sell their book actually for $85. For that seller, and there was only one, that seller, the market generated a producer surplus of $25. They were willing to take $25 less than what they had actually paid, what they had actually sold the book for. Okay, now moving down a row, when the price of a book increases to $5 more, now we have 2 more sellers who enter the market. These 2 sellers were willing to sell the book at the lowest price that they were willing to accept is $65, but they were pleasantly surprised when they were able to sell their book for $85. So for each one of them, the market was able to generate $20 in producer surplus, but there's 2 of them. And so the producer surplus generated at that price is actually 40. And I'm just going to put in parentheses 20 times 2. And I hope you're noticing that the numbers that we're calculating for producer surplus are actually exactly the numbers that we got for the area of the shaded region of our graphical representation of the table. Okay, so moving down again one row, we see when the price of the book increases to $70, we have this little gap here where nobody actually is willing to sell at that price, at that, their lowest price is not 70. And so while if we had a seller, we would have produced, the market would have generated a producer surplus. Because we had nobody willing to sell at 70, we actually have had no producer surplus generated at 70. Moving down one more row, we have the price of the book is $75. We have 3 more sellers entering the market when the price of a book is $75, and that is the lowest that they're willing to go to sell this book. And they're pleasantly surprised when they can sell that book for their books for $85 a piece. So each one of them, for each one of them, the market generated a producer surplus of $10, and there's 3 of them. So we have a producer surplus, a total producer surplus generated at that price of $75 of $30, and that is just going to be $10 times 3 sellers that entered the market at that price. Okay, going down a row, we go to 80. 3 more sellers come in, pleasantly surprised when they sell their book, not for the lowest they were willing to go, which was 80, but for 85. So the market generated a surplus for each one of them of $5, but there are 3 of them, and so the total surplus generated at $80 per book is 15, and that's just going to be $5 times 3 sellers who entered the market. Moving down one, we have 1 seller who is willing to accept for their book $85. That's the lowest they're willing to go. And they entered the market and was indeed able to sell it for $85. Now, there's no surplus generated there because the lowest they were willing to go is, in fact, what they sold the book for. And so we just have actual prices $85 minus the cost, or least willingness to sell, is also 85. If you subtract the 2, we get 0. So I'll just put in parentheses here 85 minus 85. Okay, so to get the total surplus that's generated here, total producer surplus, I just need to add all these numbers together. So I have 25 plus 40 plus 0 plus 30 plus 15, giving us, again, 110, same as before.